Welcome everyone to Women Talking About AI, episode 6 of season 1. In this exciting installment, hosts Jessica and Kimberly are joined by their first ever guest, Dr.Anna Mills. Anna is a leader in integrating AI in education with extensive experience in community college writing instruction. She tested GPT-4 for OpenAI, curates a widely used AI resource list, and has conducted numerous faculty development sessions. Join us as we dive into Anna's insights on AI literacy, academic integrity, and the evolving landscape of AI in higher education. Get ready for an enlightening conversation on the challenges and opportunities of AI in teaching and learning, and of course our pits and peaches at the end. Welcome everybody to episode 6 of Women Talking About AI. Today we're very excited to have Anna Mills as our very first guest on the podcast. Anna is a leader in integrating AI in education. She has teaching experience with technical knowledge and commitment to open resources. She focuses on AI literacy, academic integrity, and AI applications in higher ed. Right now, she's teaching at the College of Marin and has 18 years of community college writing instruction experience. She was the sole education specialist testing the GPT-4 pre-release for OpenAI. Anna also curates a widely used AI resource list, which we will link in the notes for you, and has conducted over 40 faculty development sessions nationally and internationally. Her work appears in prominent education publications, and she serves on several different task forces. She has authored the open textbook, How Arguments Work, which has been adopted by 65 colleges, and she advises for myessayfeedback.ai, the AI Pedagogy Project, and the NIST US AI Safety Institute MLA team. So you can see why we are very excited to have her as our guest. And so welcome, Anna.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I love your podcast, so I'm really glad to be in conversation with you.
Thanks.
Kimberly, do you want to talk about... So Kimberly introduced me to you, Anna. I wasn't familiar with your work, and Kimberly shared an article you published earlier this year with several other authors called Assistant, Parrot, or Assistant, Parrot, or and I immediately started following you on LinkedIn. And we want to start there. That publication inspired a lot of our recent work. It really gave us the idea for our AI literacies framework based on Selber's work. We find ourselves returning to that publication like again and again.
Wow.
And so we thought that might just be a fun place to start with you in terms of like what inspired that work.
I think sort of social media discussions with Gupta, who's the lead author and is writing his dissertation on AI literacies, and Mahabali and her student Yasser Tamer. So I think we were in this space mostly on X, of trying to be both critical and curious and find kind of playful ways to teach about AI and engage with educators about AI in workshops. I think that Mahabali's been doing that for years, and she and I had collaborated on an earlier paper that was about open educational practices and combining this critical and curious and playful and exploratory approach. So it felt very organic. When Anuj asked me to get in on that, I knew Maha had already been doing a lot with metaphors in her workshops on AI. And then Anuj brought in Selber's framework for AI for literacies, and I had the idea to apply that, which is to divide it into functional, critical, and rhetorical literacies, which ultimately just gets at this sense of we need to be able to critique it, but also understand how it's useful, and then make informed, ethical, situated decisions reflecting on our practice about when and how to use it, or if we want to use it. And yeah, I'm so glad that was helpful. It really influenced me when Anuj found that framework and we worked with it. And then I brought that to our task force work with the Modern Language Association and the Conference on College Composition and Communication Task Force on Writing and AI. So when we were doing our critical AI literacies paper, we gravitated toward using that as well. It's nice to have something to hold on to that feels practical and also just theoretically pretty clear.
We had been working with educators, and I have been working with Kimberly on trying to guide educators and just ourselves in how we use AI. I mean, I still supervise doctoral students, and I had been searching for a
Mm.
framework to help me make sense of what does this look like in my curriculum at a high enough level that it didn't need to be specific to a use case. And after
Mm.
reading your publication and then looking into Selber's framework, it just seemed like a naturally good fit. It makes sense, and that's how I think you know that you found a good framework, is it makes everything
Mhm.
click.
Yes.
But I'd be curious to know, I know that you have a writing background, but something that we've come across is I was working with this professor who's a marketing professor, for example, and I was using that framework to help him think about how to integrate AI into his courses. And when I used the word rhetorical, it immediately turned him off. He was like,
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
not, that doesn't apply. I'm in marketing. And I was like, no, think about this. It's
Right.
rhetoric. Everything in marketing is messaging and audience. And it like took a little bit to help him see that it was still applicable. But something that Kimberly and I have been playing around with, and we haven't landed on it yet, but is there another word that we could use instead of rhetorical? Because those outside of the writing community might not immediately see the applicability of that rhetorical literacy component. So I'm curious to know what sort of pushback or challenges you've had in terms of when you discuss that framework, or even just aspects of just critical AI literacy with educators.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because I feel like it's an ongoing practice for me to resist the vocabulary, resist the technical vocabulary. In my textbook, I try not to use those terms because students get so hung up on them. And even writing teachers, it's like I might freeze up sometimes thinking, what is really meant by rhetorical here?
Mhm.
And I think when we're trying to translate the framework into this working paper on AI literacy for the task force, we were working on how else can we say this so that it's clearer what we mean in a practical sense. And I think we're still wrestling with that. On one hand, it's strategic and situated, but it's also ethical. So I think of those concepts as key to what is meant by rhetorical there. I think what we settled on was wise use, sort of the idea that it brings the other two into consideration and that it's also, I don't know that wise implies enough about it being situated and contextualized to what I want to do right now and what my audience is and all of that. But that's what I gravitated toward. But I think it's great for us to keep exploring that.
Yeah,
And yeah, I want to take a closer look at your framework as well.
we'd love that.
Yes.
We'd love for you to look at our framework.
we I sent it to Stuart Selber as well and requested that he weigh in on it, but so far nothing.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Can we back up a little bit and just I'm curious to know a little bit more about you, like who you are and where how you got
Mhm.
to what you do now and what some of your formative like experiences were that led you to this place?
Thanks. Yeah. So I grew up in Silicon Valley
Mm.
and my dad was a mathematician and an engineer. And I realize now that he was working in the antique AI expert systems space. And I grew up like connecting with him around really liking math and thinking about these crazy questions he was coming up with about language and meaning and consciousness. And but then I moved away from that. I felt like I didn't want to be a math professor because or a computer scientist because I wanted to connect with people and find my voice, and that's where I found the most meaning. And that's, what I chose in becoming a writing teacher. But then there was part of me that kind of, at least I wasn't intimidated by AI in the way that maybe so many others are. It
Mhm.
felt a little bit native to me to be like, this is something I should wrestle with because it makes sense to me and I see the implications. So in June 2022, when a friend said to me, you should write your conference proposal about AI, it would be more sexy. I was like, what? And then I went and was researching and found out about GPT-3 and was like, holy shit, I couldn't like sleep or drink caffeine for weeks. I just was astounded by the whole thing. Really? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it was really,
Couldn't sleep. I could not sleep.
oh my God. Yeah.
Me either. Ever dream. Like, I couldn't make sense of
Wow.
it. It was so exhilarating, but terrifying at the
Yeah.
same time. I feel like at that time, Kimberly and I were talking like every few hours. We'd be like, "Oh my gosh, it can do this, and then it can do this," and then we were trying to come up with ideas for research, but we weren't thinking big enough. Um, can
Mhm.
you tell us about that moment when you first used GPT-3? Was that, I assume that was the first LLM you used?
Yeah, I just had a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, but also the feeling of exhilaration and I can't believe this is possible. And part of me was cheering it on, going, wow, it can do this thing. It's, oh
Mhm.
my God. And part of me was saying, oh, like this is such a huge paradigm shift. And I told my department chair at the time about it, and she was like, it's, you're speaking another language. And I saw that this was going to have huge implications for the teaching of writing and the practice of writing in ways that we were not prepared for and that wasn't coming out of our values as writing teachers. Um, but I was just hypnotized by the power of it and the infinite ways it could be used and the infinite implications and directions this could take us. And it was a combination of anxiety and excitement and but it also gave me a sense of purpose and challenge, I would say. And it helped me turn toward other educators. So it really was the moment that I started doing more on social media and connecting with people outside my institution a lot more. In that way, it actually turned me more toward people and helped me connect, which was probably the most important thing about it in my life.
That's been an interesting aha moment for me that I've come to recently. I was recently at an AI think tank panel, and it was so multidisciplinary. There's physicists
Mhm.
and animation experts in the room, English and composition teachers, machine learning engineers. And I find that I'm connecting with so many people outside of my discipline more than ever before.
Mm.
And I'm actually learning more about what it means to be human through my study of AI. I'm reading Max Bennett's book right now on a brief history of intelligence.
Huh.
And I'm learning about like the first nematodes and bilateral
Wow.
cells and how intelligence first came about. And that's helping me understand artificial intelligence. So it's like this weird full circle, like obsession with machines. And then it helps me understand like our humanity and connect with others. And has been super unexpected. I think Kimberly's had a similar experience too, but she's talked to me a lot about it from a language perspective because she's an applied linguist. So I've learned so much from Kimberly.
That's so
Yeah, I just immediately, and I keep saying this, I'm just like a broken record. Like the word generative is distracting for me because language is a representation of so much else that's going on in a mind. And it's what comes out of it is just what we see. And of course that's
Mhm.
just words. But it has like I the main way I use it now is as a thought partner to push me to go deeper, but I already had those skills developed. My concern is like with younger people who don't have those critical thinking skills fully developed, like you and I have connected on LinkedIn a little bit with I shared how my son interacts with ChatGPT in our shared account. It's will they be critical enough that it doesn't concern me for my use, but like for young, especially for younger people, what are the long-term consequences for thinking, because language just represents what we're thinking. And so when we see those words and we didn't think them up ourselves, what does that mean? I don't know. I have these big like philosophical questions that I can't really answer.
Yeah. Yeah. I have definitely moved toward trying to provide some concrete guidance on and some limits on when and how to use it in the learning process and in the writing process for
Mhm.
students who are studying writing, or for any class where the purpose is of the writing is learning. And I think that we do have to protect those experiences for them so that they are developing their own voice and they are wrestling with the ideas and having the friction and getting through that to some clearer understanding that they've come to by brainstorming and revising their own points. So it's interesting though, because I try to push back against the polarization of discussions around between the embrace and the reject AI, because I think we've got to provide guidance, and it's going to be expected that they understand what it can do and some ways they could use it. And it's powerful enough that it makes sense to use it sometimes, I think. And we can try to mitigate the environmental costs, and we can try to regulate AI to reduce the harms. But I think it makes sense to teach it some how to use it, and also to be really clear that it's not for everything and it's going to have disadvantages. And there are times when we want to say no, or we want to say, here's a use that will support learning, but it's very specific kind of prompt. And I think this is really your approach in Moxie also, is toward formative feedback on writing and as a thought partner. So I really identify with that and appreciate that you've been voices for that, because that's my approach as well.
Yeah, that's been our from the very beginning. That was what we envisioned, and we've been lucky enough to see it to fruition somewhat. Still developing that, but yeah. Will you talk a little bit about your work as a consultant with OpenAI? I know you signed a NDA, surely, but just whatever you could tell us. What was that like?
Oh,
Did
yeah.
you just get a message from OpenAI saying, "Hey, will you come join us to talk about this?" Or what happened?
I'm not sure how they found me. Lama Ahmad, who was the head of their red teaming effort, so they were testing possible negative effects of GPT-4 before they released it and still tweaking it. She reached out to me, and I think it's because I had gotten onto the OpenAI developers forum, like their message boards for people who were trying out GPT-3 for free and doing tests with it. And I had gotten on there and I had interacted with some folks saying, let's see how well it does at producing academic essays. Let's understand its capacities and think about both, could it be used for cheating, and also could it stimulate some interesting thinking? And so I think that's why they found me, because I was doing experiments with David Shapiro, who was really active on the message boards. But it felt very arbitrary. It felt like, oh, they really should be asking a lot more educators and people with different kinds of expertise than I have as well. But when I hesitated to do it, I had never signed an NDA. I didn't want to be compromised by working for them in terms of what I could express about their policies. And so I initially said no, but I think Lama Ahmad just really sincerely thought that I would give some straightforward and interesting perspectives on educational impacts, and she just encouraged me to reconsider, and I did. And it was a great education in systematically testing GPT-4 on particular prompts that were based from my textbook and from my assignments that I've taught for years, and comparing them to, say, sample essays I had in my open textbook, and trying that at tweaking the temperature and the prompt and seeing how the results were different. So there was a good education in just seeing what could it produce in terms of academic writing. And I quickly saw that we weren't going to be able to out-prompt it in terms of assessments that it couldn't handle, that if you fed it more information, it could do a plausible job, and that it could do different style, just a hyper academic style, but a more conversational, more typical student style. And so I got that education, and then they said you could write a little report on educational impacts. And again, I was feeling like, really, you should have an army of people who are educational researchers doing this. But I wasn't really in a position to tell them how to run their program. So I just gently would bring that up and talk about the need for more research. And I just wrote like a 3-page piece about adverse impacts. And at that time, I was really encouraging, and I continue to encourage, mechanisms for labeling of AI text, distinguishing human from AI, and hoping that they as a company would commit to that. And I don't know, the report was well received. I don't know to what extent it influenced them, but they came out with the detector, and they're working on watermarking. The detector didn't work. They pulled it. They have watermarking of AI text, but they haven't released it. I still hope that maybe they would, since Google did. But I found that many people at the company were sincere, and they had differing opinions, and they wanted to see some regulation, and they wanted to think about how the company could do better. And so I I felt like it's important not to become like where we're dehumanizing each other in these different camps. And I was glad to have some engagement with them and had a good experience. But again, I wanted to stay. I haven't sought out that kind of work since because I want to stay really grounded in, I'm just going to speak from a writing teacher's perspective and what is helping me, what is affecting my students. What are my choices as a teacher? That's the fundamental place I want to speak from. So I don't want a lot of influence from companies. If I'm working a lot for companies, then that will affect how I think about these things.
Of course. How can you tell me about, like, maybe when you initially first started using generative AI in your writing courses, how that has evolved? Like, I think about, I'm on my fourth or fifth semester now, and every semester, and I teach academic and scholarly writing is one of the courses I teach, and I'm constantly learning and shifting my approach. I think we all are. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, maybe things you were doing in the beginning that you learned did or didn't work, and how that approach has changed over time?
Yeah. So I'm continuing to use AI for formative feedback to supplement human feedback and not invite them to use it as part of their writing process, but just for feedback. So that has stayed the same, but I've started to require them to have more dialogue with the feedback. Initially, I was just asking them to reflect on it. And now I'm saying you have to ask at least one follow up question. And maybe I'm going to extend that to more because I think that's the speaking back to AI and the pushing it, the iterating is such a critical part of AI literacy and of building their confidence in their own judgment in relation to it. So that's one thing. Another thing is that I've started to build some custom chatbots to supplement the AI feedback through the app. So, like, I built one for explaining if I've marked fragment on their paper, they can have a chat with the chatbot about what does that mean and ask questions about specific grammar terms. And it's based on the material in my OER textbook and some others. So, building as those RAG systems have come in where you can upload a lot of context material, including open textbooks, I think it's helpful to build custom bots for particular purposes. And then the other thing I'm doing, influenced by some researchers at UC Davis, is to try to combine peer feedback with AI feedback and experiment in how they can be complementary. I was already doing peer review and also the AI feedback, but these researchers had found that students really wanted both. And that made me wonder, like, should they be looking, they're giving feedback and the quality is not always what I want it to be of the peer review feedback. So I thought, once you've given feedback, you're curious about what did the AI say? Is it the same as what I said? Did it think of something else about this paper I just read that, or not quote unquote think? And so I'm experimenting with that. And I like seeing the students say, yes, it had good points on this, but I don't agree about that. So making that interaction with the AI feedback a little bit more social, integrated with the peer interactions, is something I'm really interested in continuing to explore.
Yeah, I'm doing that as well. It's interesting because I've been doing peer review. I work with doctoral students, and I've always had peer review built in, but it's just, in a way, it hadn't been working. Like, to some extent, they see each other as a novice, and they don't necessarily really value that peer's feedback. They want to know what I think. They want
Mhm,
my feedback.
mhm,
Obviously, we know the benefits of peer review feedback, but I just found over the years that it was really hard to get them to take that peers feedback seriously and really reflect on it and implement it. And I agree. I now have them use AI for formative feedback and compare and contrast, and then explain, like, what they decided to do differently with their work and why, and just reflect on that process. And now I have them use mine. So I give them feedback on their first paper, and they ultimately revise it. And over the course of the semester, they get peer feedback and AI feedback. And in the final paper, they have to reflect on mine, the peers, and the AIs. And they love that. Like, they're loving that way more than just peer to peer, or even just
mhm,
them straight with the AI. It's like the AI can validate, it provides some sort of contrasting element
mhm,
to, but I do find that there's this inherent sort of, I have this big question mark around trust and acceptance. As we know,
mhm.
just because technology can do something does not mean that humans are going to accept it and trust it. And that was something that I struggled with earlier in the beginning with my students, was like their acceptance. Were they valuing the initial formative feedback they were getting from the AI? And that's evolved now that it's become a bit more ubiquitous. Like that first semester I was using it, it was still pretty novel. But I'd be curious to know if you see that as well. Like, are students telling you they trust and they accept or value the AI's feedback, or are they resisting it, or mixture of both? And has that changed?
That's interesting. I would say a lot of them are such novices that one reaction is just that they're impressed at what it can do and they think, oh, this is really useful. And then another reaction is kind of resistance, annoyance, a sense of distaste. It's inhuman. And I try to encourage that. I really want them to value that response and to think about what they're not getting from it and where it's wrong, because I think that's such a valuable moment in AI literacy where you're encouraging the skepticism, you're encouraging them to see where it's off base or it's revealing that it's not really understanding or it's just following a formula. Sometimes it'll give feedback that says insert quote here. It doesn't have a quote from usually it quotes well from the student essay, but occasionally if they don't give it, they give it one sentence. It'll try to give feedback, but it'll just say insert quote here because it doesn't have, and that just shows like it's not really it's not really there as a mind understanding. And I try to celebrate those moments and the humor of them and the kind of confidence boosting of them alongside pointing out where it really is useful. I think that combining those things is ideal in guiding them to use it, because my students are very intimidated by academic style and they come into first year writing with very low confidence, most of them, about their own writing and their judgment. So I think it's a real risk that they would trust it too much. And I'm glad to see them having also those moments of, oh wow, this is better than I thought, and it is making a point, especially when it gives feedback on things like you could expand on or clarify this for readers, or maybe a point that you might want to elaborate on is this. I think those are moments when it's both empowering as far as their own purpose, and it doesn't feel like it's the authority. It feels like they could see a list of things they could expand on and they feel like energized to keep writing. And they see that the AI is useful without it being like having to be an authority, because maybe they one of those points was already clear, or I didn't want to talk about that, but I do want to talk about this other thing it mentioned. So I'm still figuring out how to best model and structure the assignment so that you get some of both the useful feedback and the ways you push back. But just building that into the app has been important. So the fact that the app I use for feedback asks them to reflect on what was useful and what they disagree with. And there's a place for me as the instructor to weigh in. So occasionally I will say, oh, I really disagree with the AI here. And there can be that human in the loop.
And you're talking about my essay feedback,
Yeah.
the app you use?
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
You contributed to developing that, right, Anna?
Not on a technical level. It's created by a music and math professor who's a self-taught software developer, and he's done a lot of work in the OER world on the platform LibreText, where my textbook is. So that's how we connected. And he was just really excited to build this thing and have it be useful and low cost, and very open to my suggestions as a writing teacher about pedagogically how it might be shaped. And I couldn't resist doing that on a volunteer basis if somebody would listen to me around how this should work. And so that we've continued to have a good relationship, and I've been a volunteer advisor. And I would love to see grant funded support for that kind of thing so that it's not a burden on the teachers or the schools, but I think it is a lot easier with a specifically designed app to be teaching AI literacy and to be assigning this without it being a big burden of labor. I hope there can be more space for folks like you and and any educator who has ideas about how ed tech should work and how it shouldn't and what the limits on it should be, to just be more involved in shaping it. I think there's a lot of distrust and sense of ed tech is evil, but we need to use it. And so we have ideas about how it should work. So that's where I want to stay hopeful about those possibilities. And you're great models for that.
I had no idea when I got out of academia and into ed tech that there was
Mhm.
such a divide. I
Mhm.
think had I known, it might have influenced me in a negative way, but now I know. I see it. I see it on social media. People aren't
Definitely.
personally, they don't have, but I just feel the polarization between lots of different worlds, the public sphere and the private company sphere, the ed tech versus the academic. And yeah, I would try to talk more about it's a spectrum. It's a spectrum of everything's a spectrum. It's a spectrum of use. You don't have to be
Mm.
against it or fully for it. There's a place for you somewhere in the gray.
Yeah, we're all trying to figure out what is the best way forward in this very complex terrain. Like, how can we do something positive? It's really challenging and it's gray. And so I think it is a relief to let go of some of the polarization and just talk to people and think, what can we do here?
Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's been something that's been surprising for me as well, that sort of tension that I didn't know was there before I mean, naivete, I think, is a good thing. I don't, given what Kimberly and I have learned over the past year or so, if we had known that it would be this challenging, I don't know that we would
Mm,
have had the confidence to set out to do this. Yeah, that's been a huge lesson learned. And I think one of the things working against us, and I'd be curious if you notice this, is because generative AI is such a general purpose tool and or technology, we tend to lump it all together. For example, at Moxie,
mhm,
we might be meeting with a doctoral program director who's thinking about using Moxie for their students who are in the research process. But then Microsoft Copilot comes in and they just think of it as all the same, as it's all generative AI. And our products are two very different products. They're not for the same purposes or use cases, but they just think of all generative AI as the same thing.
Mhm.
And that was one of the things we talked about at the panel is it is not all the same. It is very specific to the use case. And obviously it could be audio or text or image generators or videos. And obviously then we think
mhm,
about what's happening in like the biotech world. Like it's not all the same, but we all get lumped together. And it's like really that literacy component of
mhm,
helping faculty and students truly understand what it is and how these different tools, like what the limitations and capabilities
Mhm.
are. And it's not all the same thing. And that's been a really interesting thing that's happened.
I love that. And part of that to me is what are the choices that are available to us? I see people saying if we invite our students to use AI, then they're training the next model. And sometimes, maybe, but we can also talk about you can turn that off in some models or in some apps that's not allowed at all. And so we can make decisions based on privacy and how the data is going to be used. And we have some choices around that as educators, and we can talk with students about that. And I think it is a really hard question around things like environmental impact
Mhm.
and how these models were built. And there's not a transparency around the data that was used. And there are problems about how they use sources and sometimes plagiarize or use material in an uncited way. There are a lot of big ethical considerations. And I try to stay in dialogue with people who don't agree with me and who really want to be conscientious objectors on AI. And I feel like what can we do now? We can acknowledge that this is here, that students need to understand it. And if they understand it, there's some hope for a democratic conversation about what does
Mhm.
this look like going forward? What do we want it to be? What should the rules be? Rather than just a passive companies are doing their thing and I say yes or no.
Our voice really matters. I mean, it really, and I think about when you're in an educational institution, like now is more than ever, it's important to speak up and talk to decision makers about how you're noticing it being used. Because what's interesting is there's so much demand from the student side, but
Mhm.
so many faculty are unable to keep up and match that demand. And so this definitely is not balanced. And it's just there's a big scramble and I think like people are looking for guidance and if you have an opinion on it and you understand it, I think speaking up and talking to others, but just the impetus on learning and understanding it and trying to have a voice in your institution. Like my institution sent out a survey about using, should we renew our license for Turnitin's AI detector? And I was
Right.
just like, no, please do not. And I was like, I am willing to come speak to faculty about why we should not, like, I'll give a
Mm.
free workshop on this. Please do not pay for this and use it.
Mhm.
And my dean actually really thanked me. He was like, I've just gotten a lot of yeses and nos without really knowing why
Mm.
people were saying no. And
Mhm.
so I think having that voice and being willing to speak up does have a difference on how technology is adopted.
Absolutely. Yeah. And being willing to be frank about it. And I get why people want Turnitin AI detection. I've felt that temptation. And then we do need some forms of accountability, in my
Mhm.
opinion. And there are reasons to be hesitant about adopting it, but yet we have to. I think we have to support faculty in terms of compensation for the training that they need to do as part of it, and also support faculty in terms of empathy for where they're coming from and
Yeah.
valuing what they're bringing to the table, even in terms of their resistance to it and their skepticism of it. Those may be important in shaping their pedagogical response. So, how can you engage and teach, but also make that space for faculty to be leaders in their own right and to feel more bold and more like authorities around this?
Yeah.
That's my.
Speaking of kind of guidance and advice, so two questions. What advice do you give when if faculty were to come to you and say, I don't even know where to start. What should I do? How should I do it? And also, second part of the question is, and then where do you go to get guidance? Who are the kind of thought leaders that you look to?
Mm, oh, great questions. I have some little AI literacy micro lessons that I share in a workshop,
Mhm.
and they're often places where people could start to explore playfully on their own, either watch Joy Buolamwini talk about facial recognition and bias in AI, but little bite size. I think starting with kind of playfulness and humor and skepticism. The biggest advice is just don't be afraid of it and don't think that you have to do a certain set of things to get up to speed to follow a particular program, but do spend some time with it. So I do follow Ethan Mollick and I get a lot from his posts, although I do think he tends toward a bit more toward the boosting side than maybe I do. But I think he has a point when he says you have to spend a certain amount of time iterating with it to really get a sense of what's possible and the different ways it can be used. And you have to use a state of the art model. And so I think that's a good point. I think, his videos on practical strategies for students and faculty are good places to start. I think Jose Bowen's book, Teaching with AI, is also really useful. Again, a little bit more on the booster side than I would be, but still super useful. And I definitely look to Ethan Mollick, but I also look to people like Lauren Goodlad of the Critical AI Institute at Rutgers and Maha Bali, who writes about both critical and curious approaches, and Anuj Gupta. Yeah, and so many people on Blue Sky and X and LinkedIn. And I guess the biggest advice I would say is to try social media. And we tried to start a hashtag for community college faculty in California around CCC AI Learn. And that's the message I've sent in this professional development advisory group for California community colleges, is that so much learning is happening on social media. And sometimes it's actually very supportive and just in time. And people can be frank in private Facebook groups around AI and education, and LinkedIn and X and Blue Sky. So there's a lot of cynicism about social media, but I think it's actually a really good place to explore and gain confidence. So I would recommend that to educators as well.
Yeah,
Mm.
that's a great point. That's at least half of what I've learned has
Mm.
been through social media. And then I go and follow that up with what's this person publishing about and who are they talking about? And I chase down the ideas. But yeah, social media has been a big part of how I've learned about AI because neither of us are computer scientists. We're not
Hmm.
coders, we're
Hmm.
not technical. So I really appreciated what you said earlier about how when you come to it, you weren't afraid immediately. Yeah, it's the same for me. And I think that's true because she's an entrepreneur. She's always had to wear so many hats, and one of those is technical. So even though we're not technical, and I always tell people that you're not going to break it. You are not going to break this thing. There's no way.
You'll learn something from it, right? Like,
Yeah.
you can get it to mess up, then you really learn something about it.
That's right. There's gold in that moment when you're like, oh, wait, no, that doesn't make any sense. For the first time, a model gave me a spelling error.
Yeah.
And I was like, I called Jessica. Like, what just happened?
And it was a weird word. It was like book, and the K was before, and it was something so odd.
Yeah.
And you're like,
how do I not remember that word? It was such a pivotal moment. I was like, AI.
I love that bizarreness of it sometimes. It just reminds you that it's like number crunching in the background. And I really love, I don't know if that book, You Look Like a Thing and I Love You, by Janelle Shane. It's from 2018, but it's still completely relevant. And it's an education on AI and how it works. But so much through humor and absurd examples of AI systems messing up and misinterpreting, what they're supposed to do and doing things that are really nonsensical, and how that shows us their inner workings. So I'm just captivated by that idea. And that there is something really fundamentally absurd about AI and about the collision between human and AI, and us trying to make meaning out of this thing that's just statistically processing other human productions, but it doesn't get it. And it's just a very weird landscape. And I think we can embrace that, as Janine does.
Have you seen The Wild Robot or read the book?
I haven't yet. My kids love it. I haven't seen it. Yeah, you recommend
I thought it was great. I thought it was so good because there aren't humans in it. So you can be removed from it, and you can see how the robot interacts with another kind of, what's a duck, I think, or a goose. I don't remember if it's a duck or a goose, but anyway, it's an animal. And then there's all these other animals in the forest, and it's like they have to work together. The robot, the machine, has to become more part of the natural world and understand the natural world. It can never function on its own. It was like it's very much I think I posted on LinkedIn. This is like Alison Gopnik's idea that it's a social technology. It's a cultural. It has to have the social piece. And that's what you say. It's contextual. It's like it's situated in something, and that's the rhetorical piece, really, for me.
Yeah, we bring the meaning and the intention and the purpose. It has no emotion. It has no purpose. It has no belief, conviction. Yeah.
We're getting close to time. Do we want to do our pits and peaches?
Yeah.
Or did you have another question? I don't want to cut you off.
No, I feel like I love long form interviews. I'm like, I could sit here for 3 hours, but we want to be thoughtful of your time, Anna. So let's close out with our typical closing structure, our pit and our peach of the week. Kimberly, do you want to go first, or do you want me to dive in?
Sure, I'll go first. My pit of the week is that I was teaching a community yoga class, and it had dwindled down to one person. And so I was teaching it to one person every week. And then finally we just were like, yeah, this is awkward. It's not working. So I had to just call it. This is not the time or place or something. And like simultaneously relieved and also sad. So I guess that was mostly a pit. And my peach is that my son, my youngest son, agreed to allow me to take him and his friends on a trip to an area big mall that they think is fancy, and as long as I stay away from them. But I'll take it.
Oh
Like,
my
What are
gosh.
you going to do? Are you just going to walk around by yourself and go shop?
I don't know. I probably will find something to do. And there's a bookstore there. I'll just go to the bookstore and sit. And, hide. I don't know. Yeah. So that's me.
What about you, Anna? Do you want to go?
I can relate to that because I have a 13-year-old son. And I guess my pit would be just like the pressures of all these people needing so many things from me and my family and wanting to do so much for my kids and my parents' generation and just not having enough time to write the things and express the things that I want to that now are around AI and all the stuff we're talking about. And it's I have so much in me and there's not space to bring it out. So I think that's just the ongoing frustration. Yeah. Waking up in the night, I need to do this and that and the other. And it has to be possible, but it's not possible. We're trying to help my kid tour high schools in San Francisco right now. And it's stressful and he needs support and guidance. But I guess my peach would be like the gold of whatever works with my son at this age as he's becoming more prone to argue and push back and define his own identities. There are moments when we have good discussions about AI or about politics, or like he came to class with me this week because his school was closed. And I felt really proud. Like, this is my son. And he had something to say in the discussion. And
That's cool.
so, yeah, bringing those worlds of like, I am a person with things to say in the world versus I am a mom. And the moments when those can meet, that's pretty cool, special.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Oh, I love that. Well, I don't have children, so my pit and peach are it's just all about me.
That's great. Yeah, no,
So
yeah.
my pit, okay, so I feel like I have to give a little context, or this is going to sound weird. So I loathe going into stores. I will order something to like Costco is across the street from my house, and I refuse to go inside. I order delivery. I just can't go in there. The only things I order from Costco are 3 times a year. I order toilet paper and paper towels in bulk. And I did that order last week, and I was like, 2 rolls of toilet paper left. And of course, I'm like, I'll order it, and it's gonna be timed perfectly. And my order comes in, and they sent me napkins. They sent me 3,000 napkins instead of toilet paper.
Uh-huh.
And I think I was on the phone and I was like, what? I was like, am I going crazy? Did I order napkins? I was like, no, I ordered these correctly. So then I was out of toilet paper. So I had to go into the Costco to return and hog myself up. It was the true pit of my week. And so everyone who knows me knows how horrible well, I use a lot. Also, I have to use 1-ply toilet paper because I was raised too much to admit. But not good for the environment. So everyone jokes with me about that toilet paper is fucked up for you. And I'm here at the hotel with my friend Alex, and she's joking. She's like, I got extra toilet paper sent to the room. Anyways, that's also my peach is that I'm in San Francisco right now.
Oh.
Yeah, I got here last night.
Oh, wow.
I'm visiting my friend Alex and Gina, and we're going to Sonoma this weekend for a girls' weekend. I'm tired, but I'm also excited. I got in really late last night, but
oh, yay.
Cool. You guys are in the same city together right now, right?
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah, we should have just recorded this together live in person.
Yeah.
All right, Anna, this was wonderful. I see you have a black cat. I also
she's very desirous of being involved. Sorry.
Oh, that's how my cat would be. I have a black cat named Piper, and she loves to dance around the computer.
Yeah, I can keep talking for another 2 hours totally with you all, but
thank you so much for joining us. We'll definitely continue following you on LinkedIn and look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah,
likewise. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you.